So continuing on from the first page of the notes, we had determined last time that the square root of b is the same thing as b to the 1/2 power. And so if we're kind of going with that thought, then b to the 1 over n is really the same thing as nth root of b. So if you look at the example here, 8 to the 1/3 power is the cube root of 8. And what the cube root means is, okay, what number is being multiplied by itself 3 times to get the answer of 8? And that number actually turns out to be 2. So if you look at example number 3, we have 125 raised to the 3rd power. So this actually is the cube root of 125, and the cube root again is asking what is the number where you get an answer of 125 after you multiply that number 3 times. And so the answer there is 5. Same thing here for letter B. If you have the 4th root of 1296, that one I actually didn't know, but it turns out to be that 6 times 6, which is 36, and then 36 times 6 times another 6 turns out to be 1296. So 6 is my answer. Why don't you try C and D for a minute on your own? It turns out that 27 raised to the 1/3 power is the same thing as the cube root of 27. And again, what number multiplied by itself 3 times is 27? That number turns out to be 3. Same thing for 256 raised to the 1/4 power. That is the same thing as the 4th root of 256. So what number multiplied by itself 4 times is equal to 256? That turns out to be the number 4. So 4 times 4 times 4 times 4. So the 4th root of 256 is 4. So we'll kind of touch upon that briefly a little bit more tomorrow. Why don't you keep scrolling down? Just now, what do we do when we have more complicated fractions? So when we have b raised to the m over n, where m and n are numbers, now what? So like this first example, 8 raised to the 2 over 3. Now, I'm going to break this down a little bit because this really is 8 raised to the 2 times 1/3, right? Or maybe we should switch that around. 1/3 times 2, which kind of leads us to this, because 8 to the 1/3 power is the same thing as the cube root, and then we're going to square that whole thing. And so first we got to find the inside, the cube root of 8, which is 2, and then we have to square it. So 2 squared is 4. So my final answer is 4. So let's try to look at these bottom examples here. In example 4a, we have 64 raised to the 2/3 power. So this again becomes, I'm just going to split it up. You don't have to, but I'm just going to split it up so that you see. So I have 64 raised to the 1/3 times 2. And so that's going to be the cube root of 64 squared. And the cube root of 64, again, what is the number being multiplied by itself 3 times? That turns out to be 4. And then we still have to square it. And 4 squared is 16. Why don't you at least set up B just to see if you got the setup right. So 36 raised to the 1/2 times 3. 36 to the 1/2 power is the same thing as the square root of 36. The square root of 36 is 6, and then cubed. 6 cubed turns out to be 216. And that is my final answer. If you are bold enough, why don't you try letter C on your own? If you got an answer of 9, great. 27 raised to the 1/3 power is the cube root of 27. And then we're going to square that. The cube root of 27 is 3, and then 3 squared is 9. Okay, we will practice this much more tomorrow when you get back to class. Why don't you scroll down and let's finish up these notes. Take a moment to read how to solve exponential equations when you have a variable in the exponent, and then we'll kind of go over that. So the best thing to do is try to get both sides of the equal sign with the same base. So in the example that they give, 3 raised to the x power equals 81. Now let's change 81 so that we have a base of 3. 3 raised to something. Okay, and so 3 raised to the 4th power actually is 81. And so we have 3 raised to the x is equal to 3 raised to the 4, and so what we can actually do is just compare the exponents. X is equal to 4, and that's my answer. So let's try letter A. You have 6 raised to the x power, and then is equal to 216. If you change 6 raised to the something is equal to 216, that actually turns out to be 3. And so 6 raised to the 3rd power is equal to 6 raised to the x power. My x is equal to 3. Why don't you try setting up letter B? So 25 can be broken down to 5 squared, right? Now the squared is going to join the exponent that's already there and be multiplied by it as a group. So it's going to be 5 to the 2 times the group x minus 1 is equal to 5, or 5 to the 1st power. And so now that we have the same bases, we have 2 times x minus 1 is equal to 1, and then distribute that, so I get 2x minus 2 is equal to 1, 2x is equal to 3, x is equal to 3 over 2. So I do get a fraction there. Try setting up C. 125 is actually the same thing as 5 cubed, and so 5 to the x power is equal to 5 to the 3rd power, so x is simply just 3. And for part D, why don't you try that on your own?
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm done.
And there's my solution for x is equal to negative 1/2. If you have questions, which I'm sure we do, we'll bring them tomorrow and we will clarify either the notes, we'll go through some homework questions, and we'll practice this for a while.